Hi there, welcome to IndyCar on the 10th of April. I'm Gordon Ross. And this early morning show is devoted to a subject which has been rumbling on for a good number of years, particularly in the independence campaign in general. And that is a bunch of conspiracy theories which have been circulating for some time concerning the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. Now, the way the conspiracy theories go is that they look at the circumstances that we're living in politically and then try to look for a theory which tries to explain these circumstances or to rationalise them into some kind of reason for why things are the way they are. Now, good conspiracy theories are always based on a germ of truth, and the germ of truth is the thing which sets off the conspiracy theorists' suspicions that something is going on in the background. Now, there are always motivations in politics behind why people do things, not least of which is the politicians' motivation to stay in their cushy jobs with the high pay. And most of the motivations in every sphere of politics, including Brexit and independence, are based on people's fear of losing their highly paid political positions. So if you put that in context straight away, in terms of Brexit, if you look at the wider context of Europe, the European Union's leaders, when they come to decide on, for example, the length of the delay that's going to be given to the United Kingdom, the 27 leaders of those 27 countries have to decide how much their own electorate will put up with in terms of Brexit chaos in their own country and the effect it's having on them before that elected leader is de-elected, is basically booted out and somebody else is re-elected. So the motivations of the European Union leadership are based on how long their careers might be in their own particular countries. And the same goes for the United Kingdom, and the same to some extent goes for Scottish politics as well. And the conspiracy theory about Nicola Sturgeon goes something like this, that Alex Salmond was smeared by the British media and smeared by, shall we say, the British state, because it was UK civil servants who made the allegations against him 10 years ago. That 10 years ago he did something that made some kind of remark or pass at two women in an airport lounge that has turned into sexual assault charges. And that has taken Alex Salmond as an advisor to Nicola Sturgeon, as a mentor, out of the picture completely when it comes to indyref 2. So Nicola is now isolated on her own. So the British government would have had a reason for doing that, and the reason for doing that would obviously be that they know that Salmond is more of a gambler, and they know that Nicola Sturgeon is more of a gradualist. She's far more cautious, and she's much more likely to take her time to get things right. But at the same time, that she's much more likely to delay another independence referendum until she feels that A, she's got enough support, and B, she has enough of the political and physical infrastructure of Scotland in place to make independence not only possible, but to make it an attractive proposition compared to Brexit. But, and this is where the conspiracy theory comes from, at some point, the leaders of all the parties, all the main parties in the United Kingdom, are asked to join the Privy Council, asked to become members of the Privy Council, which is, to some extent, it's a symbolic post, but basically it asks you to join that elite group of people who are officially the private advisors to the Queen. Now, that's what it used to mean. In the old days, it was the inner circle of the top nobility who would advise the monarch on how to proceed in international affairs of state. Except that now, although they are advising the monarch, it is largely that inner circle of senior politicians which actually makes the decisions and advises the monarch on this, but also have to take into account the establishment view. Now, the establishment is all of the moneyed, wealthy nobility, the aristocrats, the powerful people in the UK who actually control what's really going on. And the inner sanctum of the Privy Council is where this conspiracy theory is alleged to have started. Now, the theory goes something like this, that Nicola Sturgeon has sworn allegiance to the Queen, and she's sworn an oath of secrecy to the British state in order to become a member of the Privy Council, and maybe some of her other senior ministers have as well. And because of this, she's now been somehow adopted into this inner sanctum of elite establishment figures who are controlling everything that happens in the United Kingdom and all its various parts, which means that she's been kind of inducted into this conspiracy, this cabal of people who secretly run the UK. And therefore she has been nobbled, she's been compromised in some way, she's been bought off, bribed, whatever you want to call it, and she's now going to deliberately delay independence for as long as possible. In fact, she may delay it forever. A little bit like Brexit. So I mentioned in the blurb on this particular programme that we're suffering from what I call a Tantric Brexit. In other words, it's something where we're never allowed to reach completion, we're never allowed to finish it. We can always just about grasp it, but never quite get there. In this tantric form of politics, it's been created to give the illusion that Brexit is something which is actually going to happen and that the politicians are bravely working against the odds to achieve it, when in actual fact the real aim of the whole process is to delay the whole process of Brexit and frustrate it for so long that people eventually get fed up and decide against it. And it could be that because Brexit and independence are now tied together because of a promise that the SNP made in their election manifesto. And they said very specifically, if you remember, that it would be a major change, a substantial change in circumstances. For example, and they named the example as being taken out of the EU against our will. And then magically the whole scenario of being taken out of the European Union against our will actually happened, exactly the way it was said that it might happen, which is a little bit suspicious, and that plays into the entire conspiracy theorists' shall we say, rationale. The rationalisation for this conspiracy theory is based on the fact that everything is so conveniently accurate to the prediction. So Nicola had stated this. Now I think that she knew that because there was a Brexit vote coming up, there was a slim chance that we might be taken out of the EU against our will, but nobody expected us to actually end up with Brexit. I don't even think that the SNP expected it. So they could quite glibly make this promise or this pledge that if we were dragged out of the EU against our will, we would have an independence referendum. But I don't believe at the time the SNP believed it would happen as it did, and I don't think they were ready for it, and I still don't think they're quite ready for it now. But again, it plays into this entire conspiracy theory that somehow or other Nicola Sturgeon is deliberately slowing independence down and holding it back and hobbling it and making sure it doesn't happen. And all of these trigger points that seem to have been passed and missed play into this whole conspiracy theory that we cannot ever get to independence because we're never ever going to get to Brexit. So the one tantric problem hits the other one. However, to blow this out of the water, you need to think about reality for a moment. And reality is that Scotland is not actually ready for independence yet. There are a number of things still to happen. And those things are being deliberately frustrated by the British Civil Service, particularly at Holyrood. The British Civil Service runs the Scottish Parliament, right? It does the day-to-day running, the box ticking, the paper moving, and it decides what is debated, what is allowed to stand, what's within the competence, as they say, competence of the Scottish Parliament. If you remember that Ken Macintosh decided that the continuity bill, this was the bill that the Scottish government designed to make sure that all of the European laws that we currently have after Brexit would remain in place in Scotland. And he said, this is Ken Macintosh, said that that was not within the competence of the Scottish Parliament. Now, Ken Macintosh is a member of a British party, he's part of the British establishment, and he is part of the checks and balances that prevent independence from happening. His job was to make sure the Scottish Government could not get the continuity bill through. It went to the High Court, it gets thrown out of the High Court, and suddenly it's ruled that it would be illegal for Scotland to have this continuity bill. And so the British government was forced to bring out their own legislation which overruled the continuity bill. You're with me so far? So it's very complicated, but the whole point of this is it doesn't matter what happens in Holyrood. Everything that happens in Holyrood is largely controlled by the British Civil Service. So for the SNP to actually do anything and to create a Scottish country which is ready for independence is fantastically difficult, because in order to get the legislation through for things like the investment bank, for things like getting a benefits agency started up, and for any number of infrastructure projects is phenomenally difficult. They have to fight their way through this bureaucracy, and they have to disguise some of the things they're doing as other things so they can get them through. So the conspiracy theorists still think that for some reason Nicola Sturgeon is actually a part of the British establishment and she's deliberately thwarting Brexit. She's not. It's the British establishment that's deliberately thwarting Scottish independence through Brexit. Brexit is being used as a lock on independence. By never getting to Brexit, it never triggers the mandate. The mandate was we must be taken out of Europe against our will. We haven't been yet. Until such time as Brexit actually happened, the independence referendum pledge, that mandate, has not officially been triggered by the letter of the law, if you want to put it that way. At the same time, the SNP has to ensure that all of the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, and that every possible way of keeping Scotland inside the EU and inside the UK at the same time have been done, because that's the only way we can satisfy other countries in the United Nations and in the EU that Scotland has done everything by the book before resorting to having, well, if resorting is the right word, but before having a referendum and going to the people and asking the Scottish people if they want to continue to be part of the union with England. So it's not Nicola Sturgeon who's been nobbled, although Alex Salmond, I believe, definitely has been, but that's my own opinion. Salmond has been taken out of the picture deliberately by the British state, and it might well be that my feeling, and it is just a feeling, that the charges against him have been trumped up, but we'll soon know, because when it comes to court, if those charges fall or there's not sufficient evidence and the case is dropped, the British establishment will have succeeded. They'll have smeared him, the mud will have stuck. Even though there isn't enough to convict him, there will always be that smoke without fire, as they say. There'll always be that suspicion hanging over Alex, whether it's true or not. So they've really nobbled Alex. They've neutralised him as a political player. It just leaves Nicola, and she is a gradualist, she is careful, and that, to many people in the independence movement, is a major flaw in her character. But it doesn't mean that she's been nobbled. It just means that she is going by the book. She's a lawyer, remember. She will go through the procedures. Sometimes it seems to be taking too long. Other times it feels like nothing is happening at all. The secrecy in the SNP is almost complete. The SNP is probably even more secret than the British state, and for very good reason. It's fighting against an incredibly secretive controlling state in the UK, which has probably got spies all the way through the SNP. It's probably got lots of MI5 agents who are Scottish, believe it or not, planted in various places all across Scotland, who are watching and reporting back and trying to frustrate the efforts at every cut and turn of the SNP. So we're always fighting against, what shall we say, well, not a fifth column, but there will always be British nationalists in our midst who are trying to frustrate it. More often than not, there will be officials. There will just be officials. There'll be civil servants. There'll be council employees. There'll be people who drag their feet, who slow things down. And we'll always be fighting against that until we take charge of the process. I think at the point where the EU has decided that, say they've got an extension till Christmas, just for talking sake, if the EU say this is the final extension, You will not get another one. You will be out of the Union after Christmas, and there will be no renegotiations, there will be no further delays. This is the last gasp for the UK. Either leave by the 25th of December, or you stay in permanently. Once an ultimatum like that's been delivered by the EU, then that final Brexit date, if it slides past and we do leave the EU, or there's a miracle somewhere in the politics of Britain and there's an agreement on Mrs May's agreed exit arrangements, that deal that was agreed with the EU, then we are coming out of the European Union against our will. And at that point, the mandate will be triggered. And the conspiracy theory fails, because at the end of this, if Brexit happens, independence happens. It's as simple as that. If Brexit doesn't happen, then the decision on independence has to be taken on a different basis. And it would have to be taken on the basis that we don't want a repeat of the last 3 years. So that's where we're at. I don't believe there's a conspiracy theory involving Nicola Sturgeon. I do think that Salmond is being smeared, and I think many of us suspect that. But only time will tell. And these are only my opinions. But the evidence points to Salmond being taken out of play at just the right moment so that Nicola Sturgeon is brought into play, and the British government knows that she will take her time, and that they have nothing to worry about from the point of view of independence, because they can keep frustrating it for a lot longer using Brexit and using their own civil servants in Scotland, in various places, to keep control of us. There will always be the threat of Mundell and his 3,000 civil servants in Edinburgh to hang over our heads. There is always that feeling that they're about to pounce at any moment, that they're about to take powers away from Holyrood, but that's not the British style of doing things. The British style of doing things is also gradualist. They gradually pare away at the power so that you don't notice the so-called death of 1,000 cuts, where they take a little bit here and a little bit there and you don't know it. The analogy is the frog in a pot of water which is being heated so slowly that it doesn't notice it's being cooked. And this is pretty much what Scotland is like at the moment, where the British state is gradually dragging us back and holding us back, knowing full well that Nicola Sturgeon is not going to rush towards independence, but is going to build up towards it. So gradually they will start to take powers away from the Holyrood Parliament. The ones that would be most inconvenient would be the ones that allow the Scottish Government to set up new infrastructure, and they'll probably be the first ones to go. Anyway, so as far as conspiracy theories go, I think we can lay it to rest. Nicola Sturgeon is not a part of the establishment. I'm certain of it. She is just a politician who's very careful. And the fact that her government is so secretive, I think, tells me that they're in a secret battle with the UK. It's a cold war going on between the UK government and the Scottish government, where neither side gives away anything. They're constantly circling one another and testing each other's defences, but nobody makes a decisive move. The British government's trying to delay Brexit for as long as physically possible, because they fear Scotland breaking away. They fear Scotland ending the Union because it will leave England in a very vulnerable position after Brexit. Something has to give. And I think the something that will give eventually, on the brink of Brexit itself, will be a deal between the English government and the Scottish government. And it will be a division of resources and assets. And it might well be a 50-50 split, because England needs things like oil and gas, and it needs more of them than Scotland does. And there's plenty of scope actually for trading. Trading something that England has that Scotland needs for something that Scotland has lots of that England needs. There will be a trade-off, but it's going to be delayed as long as possible. Politicians don't just look at the near term. They have a long-term plan. It goes maybe 5 or 10 years ahead. They're constantly 10 moves ahead of you. Nothing happens by accident, not a thing, including in the SNP. Now, that's where I want to leave it today. It gets fantastically complicated the more you think about it. But just remember, things are never as simple as a conspiracy theorist would have you believe. The conspiracy theories explain what's happening at the time in terms that are very inviting and very tempting to believe. And these kinds of conspiracy theories are actually promoted by the enemies of independence, if you like, by the British state itself, want you to think that Nicola Sturgeon is in their pay, because it sows doubt and uncertainty amongst us. And if we give in to that, then we'll be doing their job for them. So we have to not only keep faith, but we have to keep pressing the SNP for proof and for positive moves forward and for what the strategy is going to be. So we should expect to hear in the next few weeks during the SNP conference what the strategy is to move towards independence, how much they can reveal to us without giving too much away to the British state about how it's going to happen. But there'll be a lot of sabre rattling, there'll be a lot of speeches. At the end of the day, it will happen eventually, but it's not going to happen quickly. It can't happen quickly for all the reasons I've just laid out. The British state has to plan its future post-Brexit. The Scottish state has to plan for, shall we say, a mutually beneficial separation of Scotland and England, where neither side loses and both sides get what they need to survive, and we can have an amicable split and cross-border trade without any troubles later on. Politics on this scale is far beyond anything as simple as a conspiracy theory. It's vastly complicated, and this is why the European Union moves so slowly. Anyway, that's about it for today. I'm going to go do some proper work now, but think about what I've said. Think about what the conspiracy theorists would have you believe, and think about the actual reality of what has already been done by the SNP government. The pieces that have been put in place on this chessboard already there. The investment bank, the other structures that have been put in place, the new investment that's going into green energy, the improvements to health and social care, the maintenance of the health service, the maintenance of the free at point of need things that we're used to, like prescription charges and bus passes and so on. All of these things will be maintained, because this is the policy of the Scottish Government, not the British Government. And the Scottish Government's policies will continue to diverge away from the United Kingdom's, but not fast, because Brexit is always slowing things down. Brexit is a brake on independence at the moment, and the United Kingdom's using it deliberately in that way to slow things down, while they get a grip on what they're going to do. But Brexit, what it does to England, is not our concern anymore. Our concern is what happens to us and what happens to Scotland, and how we trade and how we relate to England after we have our separation of the two countries. After the union is ended, what replaces it? What's the new treaty going to be between England and Scotland? There needs to be a new treaty. And this is the thing we have to now think about, is not just separating from England, but how we relate to them afterwards. We need a treaty, and we need an agreement with England on how that's going to work. How's our border going to work? How porous will it be? What things do we have to trade that England needs, and what things do England have that we need? We can do a deal with England post-Brexit, so that both countries come out of Brexit with what they need and what they want. And that takes time. And that's why the conspiracy theory is a load of crap, because a conspiracy theory is just a very handy way of splitting the opposition. And as soon as you start believing in it, then you have sown the seeds of your own demise. That's where I'm going to leave it today. See you later.